All right. Now that we've kind of talked about the Russian-Ukrainian situation, I want to spend a little bit more time discussing the new rules for war, which came out in 2019.
Yes.
And I think you had a really nice forward from your old mentor, General Stanley McChrystal. So
Yep.
let's start with what are the new rules for war? What's different about them than the way we looked at things in the past, at least from a Cold War and a pre Cold War perspective. And then what's the
Yeah.
same? There's some kind of back to the past or
Yes.
element of it. But
Yep.
I want to steal your thunder. So again, starting what
No,
are the rules
it's
for?
good. So this book called The New Rules of War, it was a kind of a long time in the making. I mean, I wrote it very quickly, but it had been gestating for 10 years. Um, and the reason is that, like probably many of your listeners, I knew people, friends of mine got killed in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere. As a taxpayer, it was disgusting to see billions of dollars, trillions of dollars spent in these places that just went up in smoke. And then as a vet, it was hateful to see like our country was yet again being like somehow outsmarted by idiotic foes. I mean, it's like Vietnam. I mean, in Iraq and Afghanistan, guys with, you know, Kalashnikov AK-47s driving Hilux trucks and flip flops, and how come, and then I was like, but we have the best military in the world. I mean, even our adversaries know that. Even like Putin and Xi Jinping, even Osama bin Laden knows that. So what's the problem? I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, when do you think the last time we won a big war was?
Korea, and that's
Well, it's a stalemate, right?
yeah, that's a big if. The Chinese would say that they won.
Well, the Chinese say a lot of things.
They
Don't
would say they won in
they
Vietnam
would
too.
they would say those are authentic DVDs in my
Right.
yeah. No, I mean, if we're really honest, the last time we won a big war was 1945.
Right.
And so the book, that's the question of the book that started me on this journey. It's like, if we're the best military in the world, everybody says we do, it's not just us imagining it, why haven't we won a war in 70 years? What's the problem? And the problem, bottom line up front, is that warfare has passed us by. We have stood still. Warfare has evolved in many ways. Our adversaries get it, like Russia and China and Iran and others, but we have like remained stuck in the past because we have something called victor's curse, which is like, we are the top dog, so why do we have to evolve the way we fight? Everybody should evolve to us because we're the best of the best of the best, like Men in Black. And the truth is that over the last couple decades, if not much more, weaker powers have grown strong by changing the way they think about war. And that is what I kind of dissect and I distill into 10 new rules or principles of how to fight and win modern wars. Now, it's being read widely in not just the United States national security circles, but in United Kingdom and Western Europe and the Pacific Rim. Traditionalists want to burn me at the stake. And but there's a lot of people who are like, that is right on, and that's what we should be doing more of. So the book has become a bit of a lightning rod, a focal point, a point of conversation, and that's what I wrote it for. I wrote it it's a very readable book. It's not like an academic tome. I wrote it to be read. I wrote it to start conversations and not end them. But it's about how we need to change the way we think and fight war, so we don't get dusted, which arguably Putin and Xi Jinping and others have been doing to us in the last years.
So, what would your recommendation be for the U.S. to adopt this, new way of war? I mean, do we hire more mercenaries? Do we, you know?
Well, we don't hire more mercenaries. We're seeing the rise of mercenaries ever. And that's one of the rules, actually. There's 10 rules. One of this, number 6 is that mercenaries are rising everywhere and they change warfare because they privatize war. They commodify it. But basically it's this, is that most of our generals and diplomats and others are kind of stuck in the 1980s. They think that the way you win war is, first of all, war is the failure of peace. So the norm is you have peace, and then when it fails, you declare war. You do things in war unethically that you would never do in peace. And then when that's done, you go back and sign a treaty of peace and you get on with normal relations. And that's what we're seeing today with Ukraine. Like Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, wants to, diplomacy must save us from war and stuff. But that's not how, for example, our adversaries view it. They don't view it as war or peace. It's war and peace for them, right? We have this binary of war or peace as if it's like something in the late 19th century. But in truth, it's like there's no such thing. And what, for example, China is doing to us, look at the South China Sea. How is it that, in the old rules of war, which is conventional warfare, World War II style warfare, or even the Cold War to some extent, when we want to get China or the Soviets out of some place, we deploy carrier groups to show them that we mean business. We've been deploying carrier groups in the South China Sea for 10 years. It hasn't stopped them at all from expanding in the South China Sea, and they don't even have aircraft carriers until very recently. Right?
So here's a provocative statement. Why haven't we just,
nuke them?
Just blown one of those islands out of the water and just say.
So, yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
Look, it's very provocative. There's the nuclear.
No, it's not provocative. If you sit and have drinks with admirals, U.S. Navy admirals, as I have, they will tell you this. They will say, hey, look, if you give us the green light, we will take care of the South China Sea in one afternoon. One afternoon. Now, and that's true. I mean, publicly, the Navy is like, oh, we need more ships. But in reality, in my opinion, those are bureaucrats looking for more money. Right. So they hype up the threat. It's the same old, same old. The CIA was doing this in 1989 as the Berlin Wall was falling, right? The Soviets have never been more powerful. And, oh, is that the Berlin Wall falling? Don't pay no attention. But in truth, like the Navy, our Navy, I mean, the Chinese military is not as tough as people portray it, and we are much stronger than is publicly known. And I believe that, unless we did some terrible miscalculation or some strategic faux pas, we'd clean the floor with their heads on it.
Speaking of Chinese military performance, we actually got to see some of it in the Himalayas.
Oh, did you? Was it cold?
No. In terms of there was that recent, but again, it's part of what you're talking about. This kind of gray zone warfare where they steadily creep south, toward India. But there was it was all hand to hand.
Yeah, it was a pretty brutal and short experience. China favoring China, but the Indian Army is not the U.S. military, right? Yeah. So we have to be careful about this. But yes, you're right. I mean, so what we're seeing, what China is, the way that they're getting the South China Sea is that they're doing we are paradigm prisoners of a type of warfare that goes back to the 1940s, World War II. And it has a war and has peace. And they know there's no such thing as war or peace, it's war and peace. So what they do is they get up right in between that space between war or peace. And, they go right up, they play a game of chicken. They go right up to where we would flip that light switch for that admiral to blow the crap out of all those artificial islands in the South China Sea, in one afternoon. But they stop right before you flip that light switch, right before we go from peace to war, right before we go, but they keep everything they collect. So every time they expand this gradual incrementalism, that's what's working. They're doing a strategic jujitsu flip on our own strategic paradigm, which is very Sun Tzuian. Sun Tzu talks about that the primary strategy for anybody is to attack the enemy's strategy, which makes no sense to Western strategists. Like, what do you mean attack the enemy's strategy? In this case, what it means is like, look, the Americans have a very laws of armed conflict paradigm of strategy. You're either at peace, you're at war. So you attack that. You do things that are in between war and peace, and you exploit that. You mess with them. And that's how they're doing it. So, meanwhile, we keep on throwing in more attack hero groups. Like, we learn nothing.
Well, they're doing the same thing in Taiwan right now, where they're just grinding down the capability and capacity of the Taiwanese Air Force
Right.
to handle these sorties of what 30, I think the latest was like 39 aircraft
Right.
over. And at the end of the day, again, I'm being provocative, but why don't you just shoot a few of those things down and say stop? Or you just
Right.
say, if we see another one of these sorties, we're going to shoot something down. You're
Yeah.
moving.
Well, the problem is that if you're Taiwan, you're going to give China a complete pretext to invade your island.
Oh,
And you don't want
to be clear,
what?
I'm not saying Taiwan says that.
Oh, I see. Yeah, but then the question is the US going to want to, are we going to go to war in Ukraine? Are we going to go to war in Taiwan? I mean, do the American people really want to do that?
So here's the issue with Ukraine, with Taiwan, that is not with Ukraine. And I need to check this statistic, but I think uh, Taiwan has like 90% of the semiconductor foundry capacity in the world.
Mm-hmm.
If China were to take Taiwan, we would absolutely defend,
Yeah.
because we have to.
Mm-hmm.
Now there are, I think TSMC, which is the Taiwanese company that makes these foundries, is building something over in Arizona to kind of decouple that. But I think if and I also don't think China is dumb enough to invade at this point in time for that reason. I think they know
Mm-hmm.
that there's enough of a strategic um, vulnerability for us on that we absolutely would not be rational at that point, because
Right.
we would have to do something. But go ahead. I didn't mean to.
No, I think, well, first of all, I want to be one of the few people in DC who says that taking Taiwan will not be as easy as everybody thinks it will be. Taiwan has been ready for this fight since 1949. They know it's a total war for them. It's a limited war for China. They've been preparing an insurgency almost, with dug-in positions and stuff like that for a very long time. It's not like China can just go in there and hang up new drapes and we should assume it's all over. There may be a pretty good fight. I mean, I don't know what it'll look, if there's a fight, I'm not sure what it'll look like.
Isn't there
But
a
I do
demographic concern though? So for instance, there's the kind of the Chiang Kai-shek descended elites who kind of
Yeah.
run everything, and then there's the
Right.
native population there. Is there, again, thinking from New Rules of War, is there a way for somebody operating into the shadows to drive a wedge through
Of
through those two
course.
populations?
So there are, but the current president has been very popular and she's been very bellicose, right? But yeah, if you're, so China has something called the three warfares. And it's a strategy. It's called the strategy of three warfares. And what it is, it's an information or disinformation strategy. So you do things like you have state-controlled media, like CCTV and stuff like that. You use lawfare, which is using, you undermine the international rules of law brazenly. So, the Philippines sued China of the 9-dash line in the South China Sea, saying this is totally not their territory. It's been ours for a long time, and the International Justice Court said, yeah, you're right. Try to get out of it. And China goes and like radically, just brazenly, just ignores it and justifies it. And then they go after scholars in Australia and others who push against them. They coerce them, intimidate them. So they use lawfare. And then they also do stuff like disinformation. I mean, they're not bad. I mean, Russia is the best at disinformation, but they get the
Right.
silver medal. China gets the silver medal for disinformation, and they're
I would
doing
have thought
that.
we would get the silver medal for disinformation.
Well, I wish we would. Maybe you're right. I hope I hope that you're
I'm
right.
not. I'm not. I'm not. Again, I'm going to step back. I'm not. I'm not talking about domestic U.S. politics. Sorry, just to be
Oh,
clear.
yeah. Well, I think
I'm
if we
talking about
unleashed our
outside of.
if we I do agree, if we unleash the dark arts of our politicians and our adversaries, it'd be all done, right? But somehow when we do outward facing stuff, we become Puritans. It's really bizarre to me. I mean, all the dirty tricks in like Congress and political elections, I mean, can we weaponize that somehow? I mean,
Well, I mean,
that's what we need to
don't we
do.
do things like again? I'm just spitballing, but we report somebody dead, and then they say, no, I'm here in Libya.
Right.
Actually, I read this. There's a book by Kadir Hamza, who's a Russian nuclear scientist, or sorry, Iraqi nuclear scientist, and somebody published a media report that he was dead, and then he kind of rose his hand, and that's if you want to drone somebody, that's a way you can kind of
You
find them.
know, we need more of that. That's all I'm saying. It's more of that. You know, so yeah, but I think you're right. I mean, China could certainly and is probably trying to do that, but they're also doing a lot of this bellicose, like flying jets over, and
Hmm.
you know, I do agree with you. If you know, one tactic is to shoot a few down, you know,
Yeah.
and
Not by the Taiwanese, though, right?
yeah,
By us.
but are we going to commit to a possible nuclear war with China, et cetera, et cetera?
But again, that's the old thinking, right?
Yeah,
Right? You take it if you're going to take it to the edge, then you increase the cost of that, and you don't go crazy about it, but you give a warning. You say if you do X, we will do Y, and then
yeah.
if they do X, we do Y. But you make the consequences limited enough that you're very clear about where it goes. It's kind of this
Yeah.
drawing the red line sort of thing.
Well, here's the problem is that, you know, you're talking about classical deterrence, right? And that is the way in the 20th century we thought and operated. I mean, deterrence was the main strategy of the Cold War of mutually assured destruction. And before that, if you think about all the maneuvering before World War One and so forth, it was all deterrence. If you do X, we'll do Y, with credibility and capacity behind our statement. And that's the mystery of Putin today. He has credibility and capacity to do all the things he's starting to do in Ukraine, which is making us all jump rope. But if you look at it, like, does deterrence work, at least for America? Because China and Russia play by a different war play rule book. And I'm writing a new one for America, the new rules of war. So under the old rules of war, we do things like we're doing right now. And, we send carrier groups in the South China Sea. It's not stopping China from taking on South China Sea. Our great military has not stopped, Russia from taking Ukraine, from doing, military operations in Syria, in Middle East or Africa. It's not stopping Iran from pursuing a bomb. So, we do not understand how deterrence works right now. Now, the Pentagon knows this, but in the Pentagon's feeble way, what they've done is they've spent a year and a lot of man hours, like Pentagon man hours. So think of really expensive overpaid contractors from like Booz Allen Hamilton and stuff like that, coming up with how do we deter in the 21st century? How do we fix this deterrence problem? Without doing like shooting down a Russian or a Chinese MiG. And they came up, well, in a very DoD manner, Department of Defense manner, they came up with a buzzword in lieu of a strategy called integrated deterrence. And this is the new hotness in town. But it's basically the same thing that we did in the Cold War. It's just like, it's like old wine, new bottles, it's more, it's the DC two-step is really what it is. So what I would argue is that if you want to do deterrence still works, but you've got to do it differently. War is getting sneakier, and that's what the new rules of war are really about. And you look at like Russia, China, Iran, You win now by getting sneaky. You go into the shadows. You wage war under the threshold of international media, because once you have international media on your back, it makes it more hard to maneuver. And you'll see, like, you know, Russia took Ukraine the first time in 2014 under a complete fog of war that they created.
Yep.
Libya today is a fog of war on all sides. We don't know who's there and fighting and for what. We have mercenaries fighting mercenaries like the Middle Ages. We have different countries there. It's like, Total oil sniffing around the edges. Yemen is sort of the same way. I mean, the message is that in an information age, you have to wage war beneath the information threshold so that the people of the world don't know what's going on or don't care. They rather care about Kim Kardashian's dresses than warfare. So if you want to deter China and the South China Sea, you could, shoot down some Chinese jet fighters. That would get the message across, but then a lot of other factors creep in.
The media factor. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, the media factor. And they tend to escalate war for their own personal gain. It's very unethical, and they can't help themselves. They're like the cookie monster in front of cookies. Right. So they want to escalate war, which is, very Clausewitzian, actually. So what I suggest is you do deterrence in the shadows. What that means, for example, is if China says, or Russia says those troops that we spotted, someplace aren't really there, well, then who's going to miss them if we wipe them out? You know what I'm saying? If that, if you have an aircraft wing on some island in the South China Sea that you're not saying those aircraft are not there, but we own that island, who's going to miss them if that wing is destroyed by 5 o'clock tomorrow morning? Similarly, we need to fight, in the future, victory goes to the cunning and not just the strong. And our old way of war is just strength. We want to be Goliath when we should be David. And so, there's all sorts of sneaky things that we could be doing as well that we should consider doing. And that's kind of what the new rules of war are about.
So as an example, again, citing that book, Relentless Strike by Sean Naylor. Yeah. I think toward the end of time in Iraq or Afghanistan, I can't remember which, but you had some of our like Delta Force, kind of tier one organizations. They would kind of take out key people by creating, IEDs that were designed using the same components that the Iranians used, and they would suddenly go kabloom, and there would be no traceback. Same thing with, let's say, in the South China Sea. Let's say you want to, I guess, make China think twice about doing this. Right. Maybe you kind of have some, mines that are like Filipino mines that are just somewhere.
This is the deal. Yeah. In an information age, we live in an information age. The last 30 years, the next 30 years, there's no unless there's a nuclear apocalypse, we should think about warfare in an information age because it changes everything. And, in an information age, false flag operations are a big deal, right? So we're dealing with non-attributional war. So one of the tricks of non-attributional war is that you try to pit two of your enemies against each other. You frame it up so that one seems to attack the other and vice versa.
It's easy and you just keep on cyber war, for instance.
That's right, exactly. And all this shadow warfare stuff we have right now, so if you can frame it, that's a big stratagem that the United States National Security Committee, there's a small sliver in the US who are willing to do this, but the vast majority of the national security establishment is like, no, that's beneath our dignity. We can't do that. And my question to them, do you want to be speaking, Chinese in 30 years or not? I mean, what's the cost? And I hate to be so blunt about it, but that's really what's on the line. And I don't want to be too direct about that, but there is a, one of my rules, the last rules is that number 10 is that victory is fungible. And what this means is that there's many ways to win. It's not just on the battlefield. In fact, today, I think battlefield victory is largely obsolete. I mean, we all remember 2003, mission accomplished, George W. Bush on an aircraft carrier. We achieved perfect battlefield victory over the Iraq military. It meant nothing for the war, you know? And that's because wars are not won and lost on battlefields anymore. They're won and lost elsewhere, like in people's minds with strategic deception, disinformation. And that's what, great power competition is looking like today. So, let me ask you a question. I mean, when was the last time you saw a movie with China as a villain in a Hollywood movie?
Never.
Never, right? No, isn't that odd? We have Russian villains, we have terrorist villains, even have American villains, CEOs and president
They've
villains.
co-opted Hollywood. They've co-opted some U.S. politicians.
Right.
Right.
So we'll stick to Hollywood. We'll stick with politics. We'll leave aside. I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, I'm not saying which side. I'm not saying which side. I'm just saying.
I think whatever side's easiest for them. But
right.
China bought Hollywood legally. I mean, Legend Studios, they own that in the way that they own Huawei. I mean, their companies are not free companies like here in the United States of America. I mean, we have trouble getting Apple to unlock an iPhone for a counterterrorism case in Los Angeles because Apple doesn't want to lose market share in China. But, Huawei is controlled by Beijing. Yep. If Beijing wants to replace the CEO of Huawei, one text will do it. We don't operate that way. And so next time you see like a Hollywood movie, look in the studio pre-credits. How many of those are like in Mandarin? And even if you're like Sony Pictures, who doesn't want to sell out to Beijing, if you want to show your film in China, the second largest movie market in the world after North America, you have to submit your movie to censors. And Beijing censors will censor the heck out of it, right? I mean, we've seen it's very expensive. Like there's a I don't know if it's true. I assume it's true that in Top Gun 2, what's his name? Cruise has like an old fighter bomber jacket with the old Taiwan flag on it. Beijing's like, get that out of there. And so Sony had to airbrush carefully at great expense every scene with that, removing it. And what that means is that if you are writing, like, just say you're writing a science fiction anthology on China, War with China, that will never make it to any green, like an development editor in Hollywood, because they don't want to deal with the wrath of China, right? China uses its market powers to coerce and to manipulate its own, strategic narrative of always being the good guy. So think about it, like movies like The Martian. Who was the good guy? Who saved the day? Chinese NASA. You have like Looper, The Future is China. You have, Mile 13, which actually pits America versus Russian spec ops. Spoiler alert, Russia wins, a Chinese movie. And then there's a movie called Wolf Warrior and Wolf Warrior 2.
Where this Navy
have you heard Wolf Warrior 2?
Guy.
Have you seen Wolf Warrior 2?
I haven't seen it, but it's like these Chinese special forces and the bad guys are Navy SEALs, right?
It was nobody's seen Wolf Warrior 2. Yeah, it's so
over the top.
Okay, Wolf Warrior 2 came out in 2017. It's like Rambo. So except you've got like a Chinese Rambo kicking American butt. America's like North Vietnam or the enemy. And at the end of the day, like Chinese Rambo kicks American ass and everybody yells, yay! And we are the complete bad guy. The reason why nobody has seen it is because it was banned from North America.
Oh, but really?
You can't see. It was banned from North America.
How was it banned?
Well, banned or wasn't shown. I'll leave it at that. It wasn't shown in North America. And, it still made $800 million worldwide, which is like George Clooney money, right? That's big money. So right now, and so, this is what they call soft power. Now, you could say Okay, Sean, like, fine. We're talking about, nuclear Armageddon while you bring up film theory. This is a form of victory. I talk about rule number 10, victory is fungible. One form of victory is that all of our grandkids speak Mandarin as a second language and are sympathetic to Beijing values. And that's what we did to Germany after World War II. By the time the Berlin Wall fell down, all West Germans spoke English. They loved democracy. They loved capitalism. They loved American blue jeans and culture and everything else. I mean, their Nazi ancestors would be horrified to know that we turned them into Americans. That's a form of victory. It doesn't involve battles, doesn't involve lethality. It just requires strategic patience and cunning, which autocracies have a lot of.
Yep. And it's also easier to make decisions. You don't have as many stakeholders,
Yeah.
and you can make decisions quicker. You might not get to the right answer for the long term, but you're going to get to an answer faster than
Yeah.
Western democracies will. So it's a lot of this highly. The other thing too is just the supply chain issues,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like steadily over the years, they became a very cheap labor market, and companies to survive in the course of competition offshored everything to China. Now, I think the one thing that the COVID pandemic did that served us well was really put that vulnerability in stark relief for the country
Yeah.
and for businesses.
That's
So I
right.
think you'll start to see, some offshoring, not onshoring to be it's unfortunate, but to Philippines, Vietnam, and things like that. But then it's going to tie us even closer to having to defend that in order to defend our way of life against an encroaching China.
Well, we have to think about this. So, like, first of all, our military mindset is too much about like super cool tech toys,
Mhm.
F-35s, aircraft carriers. And the whole point of my book is like, fine, we already have the best military in the world. We don't need more of that. We need more of other things like cyber, like disinformation. Maybe we should start doing the dark arts of disinformation ourselves, like we used to do in the Cold War.
Oh, I
And
mean,
also,
the Special Activities Center does
right,
plenty.
exactly. I mean, we could talk about that. There's pros and cons to doing that, but we should consider it. Right now, it's off the table. And also, our vulnerabilities. It's not like China's not going to win by invading California. They're going to win by threatening our supply chains, right? I mean, and also like this whole Cold War mentality. People look at United States and Russia, United States and China. They too often pundits, scholars, experts in Washington, lawmakers, possibly, they say, "Oh, it's a neo-Cold War." There's a buzz phrase in DC called "Great Power Competition," and what that means is we're not going to start. We're not going to. We don't care about terrorist groups like Al Qaeda anymore or insurgents like the Taliban. We care about near peer powers, and the new buzzword. The new buzzwords come with new ages, I suppose, but it's like pacing competitors, China, Russia, stuff like that. But they keep on viewing it through the lens of the Cold War. And that's a blunder because there's so many differences. First of all, the Cold War was in a pre-internet age, pre-email age.
It,
Like
it was
that changes
bipolar.
everything.
It was
Yeah.
bipolar, not tripolar.
It was a bipolar universe,
Right.
meaning like if something bad happened, you know who did it. Today we live in at least a tripolar universe, meaning that you have Russia, America, China, and maybe others. And maybe they're not public sector either. Maybe they're like. And then the third is that during the Cold War, we had two distinct economic blocks, the West and the USSR. And as a result, we didn't ever really develop
Right.
economic warfare, economic destruction, and a legacy is we don't even teach that at our war colleges anymore. I'm a professor at one of our war
They don't
colleges.
teach
It's not
economic
taught
warfare.
anymore. Nope, not taught, not comprehended, not taught. It's a legacy of the Cold War. Legacy of the Cold War. Meanwhile, we live in a globally intertwined, interdependent, global economy which has a lot of opportunities and risks for a cunning strategist. And we have to become cunning strategists in this way. So the book, The New Rules of War, this is just a sampling. It really is trying to make this into a three-dimensional thing about how has warfare changed in the last, several decades, and where do we need to be? And the answer is not like, I don't talk about like, oh, we need a new type of law, or we need to, it starts with changing the way we think about warfare. It starts with increasing our strategic IQ and realizing that, great strategists, not everybody can be a great strategist, but a great strategist can come from anywhere. So let's stop privileging 4-star generals and others. And let's, there are people in the private sector who may be great strategists. I mean, why are we not, right now in the United States, strategists, that class, come from senior diplomats or senior like general or admirals who have like 40 years in a bureaucracy, which we know what that can produce, or they're basically political appointees. And being in DC and being in the chum slick of political appointees, you're usually chosen not because you merit it. You're chosen because, you drove the vans in Ohio during a swing state election, and now this is your reward. You're in charge of the Middle East. You got the Jared portfolio. You've got, and you wonder how these blood. And it's not just a Republican Democrat thing; it's an everything thing. And so, that's the system we have, and that's our problem. We don't have really. We have people in the country who are, I'm convinced, are strategic geniuses for this moment, but they can't break through. The signal to noise ratio is outrageous, and so we can't hear them.
Which is really unfortunate because you just sit back and watch what's happening, and it's just like,
Yeah,
even with Afghanistan, I'll give you an example.
yeah,
One of the first questions I had when I heard like that we were withdrawing from Kabul, I was like, what happened to Bagram? Like Kabul's in the middle of a city, it's highly vulnerable. Like what happened? And I learned recently, I think there was an interview that General H.R. McMaster did with somebody. I think it was actually on the Joe Rogan podcast, believe it or not. And the issue is you had some diplomat saying you could have no more than 2,000 to 2,500 troops on the ground.
yeah,
Well, that wasn't enough to defend Bagram. And it's just like there's just no strategic logic around that. Additionally, just on the timeline too.
yeah.
It's timelines can be flexible. If you do this and you kind of accede to these terms, then we'll withdraw.
Yeah.
If you don't, we're going to stay there and we'll just push out the deadline. We didn't do that. We just said, I need to be out of here now, like black and white. And as a result, it's a disaster.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, so this is not many things unify our country these days, but that's one of them. Like the fall of, Kabul was worse than the fall of Saigon.
Yeah, and it wasn't a military thing. It was a political debacle. And again, this is not Republican or Democrat.
Right, exactly.
Right?
That's my point, is that we all agree on this. And
it's not about it's about who was in charge executing. It wasn't the military either.
No, it's, look, wars aren't politics at the strategic level. And our system, civilians control the military. That's the system. So it's not fair to blame the military. I mean, you can blame the military for operational, snafus, and there's a lot of that to go around. But this situation was, to quote a bad old phrase from 10 years ago, a whole of government failure. We left Afghanistan the same way we went in, totally low strategic IQ.
Right.
And I'm on a campaign to raise American strategic IQ. That's my elevator pitch. Well, and the new rules of war are all about that.
Yeah, not to pick on the Biden administration, let's pick on the Bush administration, particularly in Afghanistan.
Yes.
Right? Like, again, reading that book, it was the best way to deal with that was to send troops in, not troops, but I think it's called
Peoples.
I think it's Delta called it. It was the Advanced Force Group or something like that, operations.
I'm sure it has a cute acronym, but yes, yeah.
The acronyms they come up with are never cute. They're just completely.
Yeah. That's true.
But the point is that there's a book by Peter Blaber, was a Delta guy. And his advice was to, like, look, we don't even know where these guys are. We don't know anything about the landscape. Let's just send people in, and let's develop the situation
Yeah.
and figure out what we need to do. And then meanwhile, you had politicians like Rumsfeld and mainly Rumsfeld, who were just like, no, 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 we need to have results. We need to like have a
Right.
big operation. So they
Right.
spent all this resource and blood and treasure assaulting like an empty, I don't know if it was an airfield or if it was like a village or something like that. And just so that they could show, and then they also seized an airfield that really wasn't that strategic, et cetera, et
Hmm.
cetera. And it didn't really, it just expended a lot of resources
Right.
for media consumption, but it didn't really move the ball forward. Now there were other
Didn't achieve the
operations.
mission.
Right, right. There were
Yeah, that's
subsequent operations that did that, but it was all about developing the situation. And
right.
but go
Look,
ahead.
I mean, like Afghanistan, there were actually two wars. We won the first war. We lost the second. The first war was between September of 2001 and December of 2001,
Hmm.
where our special operations and CIA hunted, searched, and destroyed Al Qaeda. And we had, we were like a hair's breadth away from nabbing bin Laden.
Tora Bora, right?
Yeah, but we pushed them out. We pushed them out, and they were like non-operational. And it would have been fine if we concluded operations December 31st, 2001.
Yep, Taliban's
But
gone.
what
Like
happened
victory,
instead in
we got
early
out.
December at the Bonn conference, we decided to change our strategy and inexplicably wanted to make it the 51st state, which is beyond dumb. It was controversial at the time, but you were considered unpatriotic if you raised it. And now we know for a fact it was just stupid. It's sort of like the USSR. When the USSR was founded, people were like, that's a dumb idea. People are not going to give up the private property for communism. Now we have like decades of empirical proof that was a dumb idea. Same with Iraq and the Afghan wars. And again, that's what my book New Rules of War is trying to prevent in the future. Like let's stop doing this, and let's also fight to win. People, I give talks across the country and abroad, and people just in the West just sort of shrug their shoulders, like we're doomed to never win a war again, and that's wrong. We can win, but we got to fight and think differently. And the first thing you've got to do is stop digging the hole,
Yeah, it's the mission
right?
creep. It's the mission creep.
That's right. And you got to stop
Right.
doing these immaculate assumptions like if we just have an election, they will become a democracy. If we just have a free economy, they will become a democracy. If they,
If
whatever.
we disband everybody who can read and write, who's
Right.
a member of the Ba'ath Party, right?
Yeah.
I
Right.
think we didn't even do the same. Did we do the same thing in World War II? I don't think we did.
Well, we did the denazification program and a similar program in Japan, but the difference is this: is that Japan and Germany, were totally fatigued from the wars. Two is that they were functional states to begin with, functional Westphalian states. And all we had to do is take out the ideologues and put in technocrats and spin up the machine again, and it ran under US supervision. And by the way, in both places, we were there for like a long time with a lot of people, right? We didn't like just do this, we weren't spread thin. We made
I think
sure
it was a
that
RAND study that said in order to control population, you what one for every 25 people.
the ratios differ, and it goes back to T. Lawrence with his algebraic, ratios. But we needed, there's a certain ratio of how many people you need. And this is the thing about Ukraine today that some Ukrainians are looking at this and saying, hey, the Russians don't have enough troops to control Ukraine. I mean, 100,000 sounds like a lot, but Ukraine's a big place. So,
Right.
that's the point. But we made so many strategic blunders. I mean, you ask like, my initial question is, how does the world's best military lose against guys in flip flops
You
and
have the world's worst
AK-47s?
political class. Next
Yeah,
question.
and the reason is that we shoot ourselves in the foot. They didn't, and that's, we have to stop doing that. So I'm on a crusade to stop doing that.
But the problem is though, like, how do you do that with the same system? Because our
Yeah.
system is custom selected to elect morons.
Yeah,
It just
no, this is a
is.
great question. Look, if I had a Harry Potter one, I'd fix this with a swish and flick. But you know, the best I can do is to put the issue on the radar and to talk to people. And what I'm finding with this book, which is, being read and is controversial, pro and con, is that there is an intellectual insurgency going on, not just in our country, but in the United Kingdom and Germany, in the like Singapore and in Malaysia. I mean, so what I'm finding is this: is that if you join the military in the 1980s, you are in your sort of conventional war, Cold War mindset. You think this book is very dangerously naive and you don't like it. You think it's, McFate should be crucified. And that class of officers are now our 3 and 4 stars. Okay. Now, if you entered the military after, say, the Berlin Wall fell down, after the Cold War, this looks very familiar to you. Right. And you look at what Russia and Iran and China and others are how they're fighting, how they're getting strategic advantage. It looks just like the new rules of war.
And just to inject another idea, right? It would also look very familiar to the De Medicis of.
That's right. Well, that's right. So the other thing you raised, which is great, is that these ideas are not brilliant McFate ideas. I just went back in history and looked at history and said, hey, the war has actually been fought this way the entire time. We have been in this bubble for the last 150 years, going back to 1802, about state and state conflicts, this Clausewitzian paradigm. And for those who don't know, Clausewitz is he's a Prussian dead general from the 1820s and 30s. He wrote a book called On War, which American war colleges worship like he's the prophet of war, and that's the Bible.
Yeah, war is continuation of politics by other means, right?
Which everybody, that's not a new thing. I mean, Sun Tzu says the same thing, but he's all about high utility of force. His type of warfare is like World War II, conventional warfare. And there's something to be learned from Clausewitz, but we put him on a pedestal. Mm-hmm. And because of the information age, because of technology, war is now shifted to the domain of, can you manipulate other people's perception of reality? Can you do strategic deception? That's how you win strategically. It's not lethality. And that's the world of Sun Tzu, who was writing 2,500 years ago, his Art of War.
Which raises a number of terrifying ideas. So yeah. One of which is, let's talk about the Chinese social credit system, right? Yeah. Like that's how you can control people.
That's right.
The behaviors that you want. You can talk about, with the democratization of like what we're doing right now, right? You could have used deep fakes to make it look right. like somebody did, or to ruin somebody's. And not only, again, this is not just a place where you democratize these tools; they're available to people who are outside of nation states. To your point, and some of these toys that are more expensive are going to be available to corporations, right? You had Elon Musk and Bezos sending people to space.
Sure.
Right.
So like my vision of the future of war, like where are we going to be in the middle of the 21st century, looks like this. You're going to have big powers still, like United States, Russia, China, some others. How powerful they will be, I don't know. Like I have expert friends in China, and they come in two breeds. One breed says they're going to take over the world by 1 October 2049. Another breed says, oh, they're going to collapse by 1 October 2049. So take your pick. But I think China is going to be there. But I also think, it's not just the world. International relations is no longer state-centric. In fact, it never was, except for the last 200, 300 years. And I don't get into the deep history of that, but the world stage now, just like it always has been, is it's a crowded stage by states, but non-state actors too. So the Fortune 500, the super rich, they have global interests, and they will find ways to protect them, and they are tired from at least from their point of view, like ExxonMobil is tired of being shaken down by corrupt host nation governments. And now that you have mercenaries, you have cyber, you have all these other weird things, they're going to start to use them. And they already are. I mean, when
Well,
ExxonMobil shows up, like an extractive
Google,
industry is, yeah, Google. It's a
Google
good example.
executed a cyber attack against the Chinese. You know
Right,
that, right?
exactly.
Right. I
They
mean, now granted, the Chinese deserved it.
No, of course
But
they deserved it. But the point is that like DC bureaucracy, the political class, political scientists, the quote unquote intellectual elite, they still are stuck in the 20th century where states rule the world. In the 21st century, states are one of many actors. The super rich can become a superpower, especially as mercenaries become much more lethal and sophisticated. So you can now rent private armies and private special operations, these tier one groups that we've talked about. You can rent them on the free market. And so what happens when Elon Musk does that against some place who's taken, like Guyana, who may have taken over his launch site or something? Or what happens when a mega church hires these mercenaries to go after ISIS 2.0 and puts a bounty on their head? I mean, the point is that their warfare in international relations is going to become much more diversified and interconnected between public and private spheres in ways that will look more like the Middle Ages and antiquity than the last century.
Well, I mean, some of it's already been happening, like Harvey Weinstein, right? They hired Black Cube, right?
Black Cube, exactly. So privates, we even talk about, it's like, I used to be in the private intel world too. That's a very potent world. That's a very, very potent world. No, like anything, there's a lot of charlatans in that world, a lot of charlatans in the mercenary world, but there's a lot of potency too. But we don't think this way in America, because we think like, oh, it's, we still think of like, we have this illusion of a rules-based order with Washington, D.C. at the center. Now, if you travel to Houston, they'll have a very different perspective, because in Houston, they're like the energy capital of the world, or at least one of them. I mean, Houston Airport has as many flights, if not more, a day as Dulles Airport or JFK. They have a very different map that they look at. There are different maps of power in the world, and they don't all involve states. And often, if you look at there's like 190, 94 states in the world. We always think of the states ruling the world, but only the top 25 mean anything. The rest of them are, they're along for the ride, to say the least. And I think that we have to think about a world where power and the distribution of power is not state-centric. And it's going to change who has power in the world and why. And yes, states like America, China, Russia, they'll have a vote, but so will a lot of others. We're not thinking in terms of that right now, and we should start thinking like that.
it'll definitely be interesting to see how this all evolves. What do you think the U.S. can be doing to? I mean, I'll give you an example. We were talking about politicians not being sufficiently educated on these topics. I know that like new Congress people who are elected, they go through a program. I think the Institute of Politics ran something
At Harvard, yeah, they can voluntarily.
Oh, so it's not mandatory.
It's not mandatory. They can volunteer. There's a couple places. Harvard is one of the big ones, but I don't think it's mandatory. I could be wrong. I don't think it's mandatory, but yeah, many of them do.
Just to address some of the, so that's just one example, but
yeah,
what can the cognoscenti of the United States do to kind of bone up on this topic and figure out how to better leverage these tools to shape the strategic environment internationally?
So we'll talk about the Washington political class, and whether you're, Congress, or you're riding the coattails of, the Bidens or the Trumps, or, there's, the swamp, as you will, right? The deal is that a lot of it's going to come from grassroots pressure. And this is why we have these conversations, that a lot of people see these things and believe them. There are people in, I talked about the generational rift about the book and the book's reaction. That is true in Capitol Hill too. And you have a lot of octogenarians who are in charge of this, armed services committees, intelligence committees, foreign relations committees, and they're still viewing things through the lens of the rear view mirror. And that is the danger. And good luck convincing them otherwise. You can try to convince the staff. But I would start with asking disruptive questions. Why hasn't, if we have such a great military, why haven't we won since 45? If we, why is deterrence no longer working? Why are we spending all this money on F-35s? Like F-35s, the whole program costs $1.7 trillion.
Yeah, the Hangar Queen, right?
Right, which is more than Russia's GDP on an airplane. Doesn't go to war. We've been at war for 20 years. No combat missions. What's going on? Asking disruptive questions. I think we have to also ask about the military-industrial complex, right? So, great power competition, the new mantra in Washington, which is war against China and, Russia, they imagine as the battle, China, the Battle of Midway in the South China Sea with, Ford-class carriers, F-35s, and drones. It's a Santa's list for Lockheed Martin. They nuzzle up to Congress. Congress says, DOD, you're going to order more of these, whether you want it or not. DOD sometimes says we don't, but they have to do it. And so what happens is that we have what they call means-driven strategy. We have to fight with, what we got, not what we need. We've got a lot of F-35s. We're going to have to use them somehow, but don't lose anyone because it's a symbol of American might. So we have all sorts of problems, but I would start asking about what does victory look like in the 21st century? How do we achieve it? And what victory looks like in the 21st century is not on a battlefield. It's not in the South China Sea or in the plains of Ukraine. That's all operational art stuff, sub-strategic. Victory now is hegemonic, like it was in some ways during the Cold War, but we can't go too far with that analogy. So you want to be the world's hegemon, like America, that means you're king of the hill. And China wants to be hegemon. It has a different vision. Like if they ruled planet Earth, it would look different. Russia, if they ruled planet Earth, it would look different. So think of hegemony this way. And that's what Putin's testing in Ukraine right now. How much is America willing to really be world hegemon? If I put the squeeze on this non-NATO neighbor, will America come to the rescue as a hegemon should, or are they going to bail? Because that would have implications for not just NATO, but for like Taiwan and other places, the Philippines, Vietnam. So think of hegemony this way. And this is what we're fighting for. Hegemony is like a casino. It's very expensive to build a casino and to operate it, right? And then once you build it, you invite all the other nation states in the world. There's, like I said, 190, 94 of them. And, so they come and they gamble, and, some do really well and some are horrible at gambling. But at the end of the day, we know who always does well, right? The house wins. And that's the privilege of hegemony. If you're the only casino in town, you're making a lot of money.
Especially when you control the chips.
That's right. You control everything. So people are going to win. Yeah. People are going to lose. But at the end of the day, you're on average going to win. Now we look across the street. We see a Chinese casino going up and a Russian casino going up. And some of our people are leaving. Some of our states are leaving to gamble, and they're not coming back. And then we're like, oh my goodness, what's going on? And what Russia and China wants to do, they don't want to nuke our casino. They just want us to go out of business and become shabby, like the United Kingdom is today, right? United Kingdom used to be a superpower. Now what is it? Second class power, maybe at best, kind of So that is the vision of Putin and Xi and others. They don't want to destroy us with tanks and missiles, and they just want us to deflate. And they're going to use things like disinformation to pit us against each other, blue versus red. So we go at our own jugular. But we don't think of war this way. And the problem is that strategically they're waging war, but disguising it as peace. And if you could do that, like I said, you're halfway to winning. And that's what they're doing.
All right, my friend. I think we covered a lot of ground, and I greatly appreciate this time. And if people were to try to find you on social media, where would they go? And then what sorts of you're also a fiction writer as well. So
Yeah.
let's kind of where can they find you first, like internet sites, etc. And then just a quick blurb about the books you have out that people should check out.
So yeah, so I you can find me on my website, www.seanmcfate.com. That's SEAN McFate, MCFATE. And you can find me books on Amazon or Barnes and Nobles or any place that sells books, Kindle or Audible. I write fiction and nonfiction. So my nonfiction, like The New Rules of War, was an Economist Best Book of the Year in 2019. It's been read widely, written to be read, not a dry academic tome. But I also write fiction because I think fiction is a great way to tell the future of war in ways that nonfiction can't. So I have a trilogy of the Tom Locke novel series, starting with Shadow War. You can start with the last book. It's called High Treason, which you don't have to read the other two books. Patterson said it was, the best, better than Tom Clancy in terms of fiction.
James,
I don't know
James
him
Patterson,
either. James Patterson, yeah.
Patterson
That was a big solid. I don't know. He read that on a plane someplace, and I didn't ask for that. So it's a lot of fun. High Treason's a lot of fun. Check it out. It's a great novel. And I contribute in all the normal foreign affairs places too, for those of you who want to geek out. But I'm based in Washington D.C. and Sean, it's so great to see you. It's been a long time since we hung out and drunk beers at I don't know, what was it, the Red Line Bar or something in Cambridge? I
I can't
forget.
even remember. I know the last time we saw each other in person, I think I was still at Morgan Stanley, so I think you came. You were in
Oh,
San
that's right.
Francisco.
Yeah,
You came
I
out
was in
and
San
I
Francisco.
showed you
Yeah,
around the floor and
I was
all
there
that.
for a boring conference. You were my savior.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, and thank you for taking a risk on this risky venture. It's not
Oh
that.
yeah, well, I'm all about risks. Well, Sean, thanks. It was a pleasure. Anytime. It'd be great to come back.
All right, thanks, Sean.
Yeah.